which is the topic that we're going to be focusing on today. All right. Hi, I'm Ellie Anderson. I'm a philosophy professor at Pomona College in Claremont, California, and the co-host of Overthink podcast. I work a lot on philosophy of love as well and its intersections with things like capitalism. So lots in common here. David, over to you.
Well, I guess I'm the odd one out in this case thematically, but in spirit, I'm very much also in this space. I'm David Peña Guzman, and I am a philosopher at San Francisco State University, and I primarily teach in the intersection of philosophy and science with a focus on questions of consciousness and experience, and also animal feeling, animal experience, and animal cognition. And so I am also one of the co-hosts of the Overthink podcast with Ellie. And so we're really happy to have this discussion with you, Laura. Thank you for putting time aside from your bedtime routine to be here with us. And I might have some questions later about the idea of being an independent academic, because I'm also really interested in questions about academic and institutional affiliation and the politics of scholarship. But for now, I actually want to begin by asking you to talk to us about what you are working on at the moment. And this will just open a door for us to then follow the thread wherever it may go.
Perfect. Yeah. So, as I mentioned, my project is called Capitalism versus Love. And it mainly consists of I'm working on a book on this topic. I also have my Substack called Love Economics, and I'm teaching a course called Capitalism versus Love at a new online school called the School of Radical Imagination, which I would very much recommend you guys check out. It's founded by a brilliant Palestinian social impact coach and economist. So yes, and basically what it is, it's on the one hand, a big picture kind of structural critique of capitalism as a world system. And then on the other hand, opposing that to love and trying to develop love as a political concept and a kind of a framework for collective liberation, building on, people like Bell Hooks and various Black feminist scholars, and I'm drawing together a lot of different disciplines for that part, and trying to bring love out of the private sphere, out of the romantic, beyond the sentimental, and bring it into how to channel this incredibly powerful force for collective liberation, which I think if we're going to defeat a monster as big and powerful as capitalism, the only thing that will help us is if we can do this, if we can turn love into this public political force.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're
Ellie,
on mute.
You cannot be heard.
Sorry, guys, not me. And the funny part is I was going to first mention a logistical point, but for then asking a contentful question, even before that, I just want to say, I see we've got a number of folks who've now joined us. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Feel free to sound off in the chat if there's anything you want us to address related to the topics that we're discussing, capitalism and love, or if you want to just share your location. I see we have someone saying hello from nighttime in India, and another hello here. Mona, some of your faves on one live. Hello, so glad you're joining us. And then a logistical point is, Laura, we're getting some feedback from your headphones. Is there a chance they might be scraping something on your desk? And if so, I don't know that I have a particular, sorry, this is one of the features of going live, but I'm noticing when you nod a little bit, it might be that the cord of your headphones is touching something that's audible. I don't know if that's possible or not. Okay.
I wish you could see the setup I have here. I do not have a tripod.
Yeah.
I have a collection of books and a plant that I'm balancing my phone precariously on.
Whatever you just did resolved
better?
it. Yes, you just resolved it. And yeah, no, the precarious setup, I am all too well aware of. As David knows, the camera that I have on top of my computer is very likely to completely fall down halfway through this live. And so I have my duct tape on hand in case that happens. So yeah, but that definitely fixed it. So in terms of what you were just saying, now getting back to the topic, I guess one question I might have is, so if you're seeing love in contrast with this force of capitalism, and I definitely see the way that capitalism works is in part through channeling love relations into very specific forms, like the heterosexual nuclear family as a unit of reproductive labor. Where are you seeing the future of dyadic, like love between couples and or monogamy? Is this ultimately wanting us to overcome the nuclear family monogamous, often heterosexual couple form altogether? And also, how are you understanding love? Like, what if we're thinking about it philosophically? You don't necessarily need to give us a definition with necessary and sufficient conditions. Like, how should we be understanding what love is?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I don't want to like be the love police and like ban monogamy or heterosexuality. Uh,
Well,
but
I'm out.
Yeah, David's like, I do. And for what it's worth, I say this as somebody, like, I work a lot on non-monogamy too, so I'm interested in, I don't know, and the overcoming of heterosexuality. I'm also interested in, even though I am heterosexual. So anyway, sorry, back to what you were saying.
Yeah, well, I think both monogamy and heterosexuality are sort of so embedded with capital accumulation and with capitalist exploitation and oppression.
Yeah,
That it's what I really would like to see is love liberated from this machinery of accumulation and this capitalist accumulation, the accumulation of profit. So part of the critique of capitalism is that this is rooted in violence, like systemic violence, oppression, and exploitation and dehumanization. And so the point is that it's very hard under these, and it's more than just an economic system, right? It's capitalism is an economic system, but it's a social order, a social form, as Karl Marx describes it. So it takes over sort of every aspect of our lives and our identities and our bodies and our relationships, the ways we love, and sort of forces us often, or coerces us, or encourages us into certain kinds of arrangements and makes other kinds of arrangements very, very difficult. So what I would like to see is to be liberated from, for that structure to not exist in the first place, because I don't think it's for our well-being, and for our love to be liberated from that structure. So, the heterosexuality and monogamy aren't engines of accumulation. They're just people loving each other. It's the same with any other kind of form of relationship, that all forms of relationship are freed from that oppressive structure. That's
Laura,
how I'm thinking.
I have a question about how we should think about the role of the family here, because in terms of the forms, the social forms that capitalism pushes us into and prevents us thinking outside of, for me, especially when it comes to love, there are, of course, romantic relationships that we have to think about, how they contribute to the problem, how they're weaponized by capital. But I also think about the family, just the fact that the family is a unit that is feeding into capitalism largely as the mechanism of social reproduction, the production of new citizens. And it also is united by marriage, which is, has its own problematic history. When you talk about liberating love, does that include also the family, or do you primarily focus on loving relationships between adults?
No, I definitely focus on the family, and I have a 3-year-old. I'm part of a nuclear family. I have a 3-year-old, and people who read my Substack, a lot of it is me complaining about the family and the lack of childcare.
Yes.
Yeah. So yes, I mean, I think the family is perhaps the main institution of capitalism. I think there are many institutions, but perhaps the family is kind of the most intimate one, the most primal, basic one, probably, that reproduces capitalist relations. It's also, where most gender oppression takes place. So I draw a lot on Silvia Federici, and she wrote a book called Caliban and the Witch.
Oh, we almost did an episode on that book, but we moved away from it.
You didn't do it. Why not?
Yeah. Too many things to cover.
Yeah. Oh well, I love that book. I think it's a brilliant book, and it really like forensically looks at how capitalism was originally, founded on like wholesale violence against women, as well as colonized people, as well as working class people. This is part of my analysis of capitalism, that capitalism was originally founded on war against whole groups of people, like a whole series of groups of people, including working class people, colonized people, women, gender non-conforming people, disabled people. And those dynamics of oppression and exploitation still at the core of capitalism, and the core of capitalism's profit drive, which is the entire kind of driving force and whole point of capitalism as a system. And the family is at the center of all of that. And the family is, historically, the family was used. The bourgeois family, especially the bourgeois nuclear family, was its functions were to hoard wealth, to keep the class system, to uphold the class system. It was a way of imposing colonial order and order on the working classes, and it was a way of disciplining and imposing order on colonized people as well. And it was a way of, extorting vast amounts of free labor from women. And a lot of that still happens. Women still do. There's a recent report by Oxfam that women do around $11 trillion per year of unpaid care work, and that's likely a vast underestimation as well, because it's very hard to quantify these things. And this still goes on within the family today. So the family is, primary site of capitalism and capitalist exploitation. So I think, on the other hand, sort of, I think that love can also, the family can also be a site of resistance and a site of liberation.
Yeah.
So I think not always. It can also be a place of intense violence and harm. But I think there's the potential for the family to be a site of resistance and liberation. So that's something that I look at, and we can talk about that more if you like. But I also think we need to free the family, and we need to be able to get past the nuclear family. Nuclear family sucks. Like nobody thinks that's a good idea. And I love ideas around chosen family, queer, disabled chosen family. Those kinds of ideas, I think, are part of the politics of love.
Yeah, and collective like child rearing, for example.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I think I agree with so much of what you're saying. And I think in general, as you mentioned, like the idea that the nuclear family is a core institution of capitalism, as you mentioned, is a really key theme of your Substack work. And I notice in my own life too, I think I'm similarly to you, I would say very comfortable with the fact that the institutions that we recognize as core institutions of capitalism can also be sites of resistance. And I don't know if you'd go this far, but like, with all due respect to Audre Lorde, I don't agree with the master's tools cannot dismantle the master's house approach. Like, I actually think we need the master's tools. And, in my own case, like I live I have an intergenerational family situation now. We started that about a year ago. We're trying it out. My partner and I live with my mom. My sister just had a baby, and I've been doing my best to like really be super active in childcare there. And I see that as like something that I want to continue in the future. And same with my friends, being really active in their lives. And so those are like very typical nuclear family types of things. But I think in their small ways, they're also trying to resist the kind of isolation and couple form that we have as a sort of norm in our society. And at the same time, I think and I'll also say, I think another thing we really share is like this idea that, the core feminist insight that the nuclear family is reproduced largely through the exploitation of women's unpaid care labor. And at the same time, I think we might land in a slightly different place given what you said about the overall core of the project, because I think I'm maybe a little bit less optimistic about love as a liberatory force itself. I think in your positioning of it as like capitalism versus love, there's this sense that like we need love to sort of break up all the things that are wrong with capitalism. And when I look at how capitalism has not only channeled what we might take to be some kind of pre-social feeling or relationship orientation that we might call love, but also the way that it's produced forms of love. Like I think romantic love, for instance, is pretty difficult to disentangle from capitalism, and I think we're probably seeing its demise. And I'm kind of happy with that, to be honest. But so I guess like maybe it's just a difference in terms of how we're seeing the relationship between love and capitalism. And I'm curious, like, yeah, if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, well, firstly, I think it's really beautiful that you're part of this big intergenerational family. And that's, I think and we're also trying to do something like that. Like we're in the middle of trying to move back to London, where I'm from, and to be close to my parents and all of that. And, I think if you have kids and, get hit in the face with quite how isolating it is and quite how our societies are set up for isolation and for doing it by yourself, and making, a friend of mine has a saying, which is, the saying that it takes a village to raise a child. My friend always says, well, what if the village has kids? Because it's like, it's very hard to get any help at all because your friends are also barely holding things together, right? So
Totally.
So if you don't have, grandparents, if there are no grandparents, if they're not around, or you don't have a good relationship with them, it's you're kind of on your own. So I think it's really good what you're doing.
You have this great article on your Substack, Why We Dread Having to Take Care of Our Kids. So I would recommend that. We can I'll link it in the chat if folks want to check it out and haven't read it yet.
Thanks. But in terms of where you land, I know what you mean, and I agree that sort of capitalism has eaten up so much of our intimate personal lives. And that's a big part of what I'm writing about, and the kind of critique of capitalism aspect. But it's, as I said, it's not just an economic system. It takes over everything. It takes over our identities. It takes over our bodies and our health, and it takes over our most intimate relationships. But I still think, and I do think that the project needs to be about sort of bringing love out of just the private sphere, just out. I agree, like romance, the sort of sentimental aspect of love. Yeah, people don't seem to be into that anymore. Don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. Yeah, and I think so. In my research, what I've done is I've kind of identified 4 ways of thinking about love and seeing love that I think can be liberatory. One is love as an ethic. One is love as a vision, love as a practice, and love as a force for transformation.
Cool.
And I think I think the ethic part is probably the part that I think is most important for the sort of overall project of liberation. And this is so people like bell hooks also argue for a kind of love ethic. And at first I didn't really understand what that meant, an ethic, but now I've got to it. And I think what it means, and also one of the reasons why I think families and that kind of familial love can potentially hold seeds for resistance, is because of this love ethic aspect. There's an ethic. And I think, I see most love ethics, and I've sort of identified various people's love ethics, So James Baldwin had one that was, the children are always ours, every single one of them, all over the world, which is, to say that the idea that every child matters as much as my child. And in a way, like, these love ethics are kind of can sound, obvious, or they can sound corny, or, trite, because obviously we want all kids to matter. But I think if you really take a love ethic like that and stay true to it and follow it through to its logical conclusion, then you get somewhere seriously radical, very fast. And by radical, I mean, getting to the root the definition of radical, which means changing things at the root.
Mm.
Because, you can't have an ethic like that and have capitalism. It's impossible.
Yeah.
And
Well,
there's other... Yeah, sorry,
oh,
Karen.
no. No, I was just gonna say it reminds me also of certain debates that have been happening for some time in Marxist circles about how do you get people to come together, to overthrow a system. And there are terms that we use often in Marxist Marxist language that we use for making sense of this, like the becoming conscious of the masses, or tapping into our species being, where we realize, there's some kind of alienation happening under capitalism. And then the term that then gets, I think, most traction in contemporary circles is solidarity. And I do think there's something about all these terms that have a loving relationship underneath them, where you fight against a system of oppression, not just out of self-love, and not just out of love for your close ones, your family and your loved ones in your immediate circle. But I think there is a spirit there of, loving humanity, loving others, and that being the basis for that. And I just want to get your thoughts on how to cultivate that a little bit more, because most of us, when we think about love, we think about it in relation to our social network. Like my friends, my loving relationships. I want more dots in my personal web. But it is harder to think about what it means to love an other that is more anonymous. Like, how do I love people who are not in my immediate social circle, but to whom I'm nonetheless connected by these very complex webs of economic dependency and oppression? So how to make that transition so that love kind of broadens?
Yeah. Well, I think firstly about solidarity, I think solidarity is a really big part of love, love in this sense of, a tool of collective liberation. I think, terms like solidarity, interdependence as well, like a lot of people who kind of look at love from the spiritual angle see love as, a way of expressing everybody being interconnected, every being interconnected and interdependent. So I think solidarity, interdependence are sort of really being part of being part of one whole. I think are all kind of important terms within this sort of sense of love. And and I think what you say, David, about thinking about it in terms of our own personal networks, I think that's important. And I think if you think about love as a practice, you can practice love within your own personal networks in a sense what you was talking about, Ellie, the way that you're trying to show up for your parents and trying to show up for your sister. And I think those are all really important ways of practicing love within your personal networks, doing it for your friends, really trying, even though our societies are sort of structured against us, but really, really trying to show up for your friends, like really, taking conscious, active, intentional steps about how do we actually build interdependence with this person, even if it's just one person. That's already hard and a lot and beautiful and important. So I think doing it in our personal networks is really important. And I think there are also ways of extending that outwards. And so, some practices, so, I've got this framework of love as an ethic, love as a vision, love as a practice, love as a force. If you think about love as a practice, I think there's two ways that sort of certain movements. I also look at certain movements that I think work with a sort of political idea of love a lot. It's like the Black liberation movement, disability justice movement, indigenous decolonial movements, and abolitionist feminism. I see in their work, I see a lot of, even if they don't necessarily talk directly about love, there's a lot of, or they usually talk about love, but they might not sort of heavily theorize it. But I see those as very loving movements. And I think in terms of their practices of love, it's things, there's two kind of types that I think are really important. One is about what activism you do, like if what you do, if you do activism. And for example, there's the Nobody is Disposable campaign, which is about, campaigning against healthcare rationing. And I think that is practicing a love ethic, because I think the idea that nobody is disposable is a love ethic, because you're saying every life is important. It doesn't matter how productive you are to capital, every life is just as important. Which again sounds trite. It sounds like, well, yeah, obviously, but again, capitalism is completely set up against that. Because it's a system of scarcity rather than abundance, system of care scarcity, healthcare scarcity, and it fundamentally values some lives as less worthwhile than others. So saying that nobody is disposable is flipping that. And there are disability justice movements that campaign actively against care rationing and for genuinely universal healthcare for all. And that I would say that is a practice of love, because you're putting a love ethic into practice and fighting for that. And then another way, so that's one way, is the kind of campaigning that you're involved with, if you're involved with that sort of thing. And another way is community building, which is what we were just talking about with your personal network, but then broadening that out, doing that more widely in your community.
Yeah.
So I think that's also a practice of love.
Yeah. And one of the kind of popular narratives around love that you have addressed in one of your Substack posts, which I'm going to link here, is attachment theory. And you have this piece called Insecure Attachment Style, Blame Capitalism, where you know that the secure attachment style is which is linked with a sort of unconditional love, like a sense of security that children should gain, is at odds with what capitalism teaches us about, kind of competitive, hierarchical, and way of thinking about how we receive care, and also that falsely imposed scarcity, which you just mentioned. And so, can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think this is super interesting. I mean, attachment theory has been such a hot topic in recent years, and I think one might say, let's throw away the whole attachment theory model because it's rooted in the nuclear family. Or one might say, no, secure attachment is something that would be achievable by all of us if we had a different model. And I know which side you come down on, but I'm curious why that is, or how you think about attachment theory for those who haven't read this piece.
Yeah. So, having a child. So I had children later in life. I never wanted a kid, was never interested in kids, never had kids in my life, really. Was really rubbish and useless where my friends had children. And then I got pregnant and, was like, ooh, I better learn something about this. So, and then obviously anytime, or certainly if you're in my bubble, and I feel like it's the whole internet, is anything about child rearing is attachment theory, right? I feel like there isn't any other theory at the moment. Yeah. So that's it. That's what so yeah, it's things like unconditional love, teaching your child that they have inherent self-worth, and you're like, okay, that sounds great, and I definitely want to do this, but what the hell is this? How are you supposed to do this? And how can you possibly deprogram everything that you've been taught, reprogram it all over again, learn how to practice it, in practice, while scrabbling around trying to meet this tiny being's immediate needs and keep them alive. That's obviously impossible. But while trying to earn a living and make money and do all the rest of the stuff that capitalism makes you do, it's impossible. But yes, I do. I mean, in terms of the kind of the way that capitalism is set up, it's exactly the opposite, right? We're not at all taught that everybody has fundamental self-worth, and regardless of your achievements or anything else. That's the opposite of what we're taught by capitalism. And this is actually where I, going back to the love ethic, this is where I actually see really radical potential in the family, maybe not all families, but a lot, because I think we teach our kids, we pretty much all teach young kids certain basic values like respect, like sharing, caring, these really basic values. And we teach our kids these values, and we're expected to, right? All of our social institutions kind of expect us to teach these values, and then later on, as you grow up, you realize that these are completely the opposite of what our society really, in in reality practices, but we're still supposed to teach our kids these values. And what I'm saying is, well, what about if we just refuse to let go of those values? What if we say those basic fundamental values that we teach our kids about respect and caring and sharing? What if we say, actually, we want to build our entire society and our entire economy, global economy, around those values? And yeah, you can tell us, we're told that we're silly and childish for naive and possibly even dangerous for wanting those things. But what if you say, well, actually, that's what we want, and we're going to get this. Like, we are going to fight for that and not compromise. So that's where I see the potential for the radicality of love within, sort of coming within the kind of seeds of the family.
Yeah. So I'm going to push back a little bit, if that's okay. Because I like love. Love is great. Love for everybody. But I also think that there are maybe some limits to love as a concept. And I want to get your thoughts on this. So it's a kind of two-part question here. One is your references just now to unconditional love as a value and as a vision make me think, and actually somebody in the chat alluded to this in a question. Let me find it. Anaga Karade asked a question that is sort of about this, about unconditional love often is how we justify exploitation in terms of emotional labor, right? This is something that we recently talked about with Pramila Nadasan, who wrote a book called Care, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. And she says, look, people like nurses, for example, janitors, maids, nannies, often the last thing they need to hear is talk of unconditional love, because that's what justifies people putting unreasonable expectations on them. And so that's the first part of the question, this danger that love can then, be used as a reason to make you do so much work because you're supposed to do it unconditionally. And then the second part of my question here is about unlovable people. And this has been a debate that I followed primarily in connection, for example, to people who are serial killers, sexual predators. What can love get us in connection to something like prisoner rights when we're dealing with people whom we can't love because they've done either horrible things in general or horrible things to us? And is there a limit there to this notion? And at that point, does love have to be coupled with some other concept, maybe like justice, where it's like, look, I don't love you, but you are entitled to justice and rights and protections. But the grounding for those protections is not my willingness or ability to love you in particular. So I'm curious about this.
For sure. Thanks, Liz. So on the first part about unconditional love, yeah. I mean, I one of my Substack pieces is called "You Call It Love, We Call It Unpaid Labor,"
Yeah.
which is paraphrasing the wages for housework movement of the feminist movement from the 1970s. So yeah, I think this is a really important argument that, the idea of love, and now with attachment theory, the idea of unconditional love is a way to extort more labor out of usually women and gender non-conforming people. But what I would like to see is, again, our love, our relationships being freed of that exploitative relation, which I think is, under capitalism, that's impossible, because capitalism is based on unending accumulation for those at the top. So it relies on exploitation. But if we had a different system, or different systems, perhaps we would be able to free love from exploitation, and that would be, the ultimate goal, I think. And the idea of, if you kind of separate it from exploitation, the idea itself of unconditional love, I don't know. What do you guys think? I think I think for children, I do agree that they, if you can free it from this idea of exploitation, I think it is important to show children unconditional love. Whether you should show other people unconditional love, I don't know.
That's a really good distinction, honestly. Because I dislike the concept in general, unconditional love, but maybe with infants, I think I'm like not even just children, just infants, like limiting it.
Newborns.
So I think that's a really great distinction here.
Yeah. I myself am an agnostic about unconditional love. I don't really think it's how we should go about adult relationships, but maybe. But I don't feel super strongly about that. But then again, and I don't know. I'd have to think about the children question more. I think I tend to want to reserve love a little bit more for like very close relationships. And sometimes when I hear people talk about like love as a political force, I'm tempted to kind of, David, think in the terms of what you were asking about, like, do we still want to call that love? I know Mona also mentioned in the chat, like, would that be something like respect? But you also, they also said in the chat, like they want, care, and maybe respect isn't enough. So I don't know. Those are a couple of thoughts. David, I feel like you were going to ask another question. We can also transition to like our meta questions too pretty soon. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Sorry, it looks like you want to, answer that.
Oh, I can answer I can say something about David's second question about people who are unlovable. I think a really interesting on the sort of serial killers. Who is it? Serial killers and who else?
Yeah, I mean,
just
sexual predators, people who do horrible things. Like Nazis, I think are unlovable. And it's not just the extreme cases. I think in our personal lives, sometimes we find people that we find morally kind of abhorrent, even if it doesn't quite rise to that level that we can't love.
Yeah.
I know it sounds weird to talk about people as unlovable, but I think it captures some of our relationships.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the movements that I find most interesting from this perspective of political love is the abolitionist movement, prison abolitionist movement, and especially feminist abolitionism, because they want to abolish prisons and all institutions of state violence. So that includes, borders and the police and all institutions of state violence. But the way they frame their movement is not just about abolishing something, but they really frame it around love. They really, I find this movement one of the most inspiring because they really frame it around freeing up the imagination and radical imagination and being able to imagine something different. And they really use the language of love and political love a lot, and care as well, and say what this movement really about. It's not just about abolishing things, it's about imagining something different, imagining a better world where you don't need these institutions, where people get care. People who do something wrong, they need help, they get care. And that's and about building new institutions that are about that. So actually I think it's, and I possibly that goes for unlovable people as well. But I don't know. I haven't done a lot of research into serial killers and people, but I would guess that they're all deeply traumatized people. Is that correct?
I mean, aren't we all in some sense? But yeah, like there are
some more than others.
Differences of degree, and of course, and here it's less about those people than it is about sort of like the limits of our capacity to bring them into this feeling or relationship or emotion, whatever we want to call love. But,
and I would.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I don't take you to be saying, David, that like that there are individuals who are completely unredeemable, but more just like would we want to call the respect that we might owe to them, the kinds of like remediation one might want to engage in, would we call that driven by love or not? Is that fair?
Yeah, I think love get us there. Although we also recently did an episode on evil where we talked about the concept of evil people. And that's a term that I've always hated. I don't think it's helpful to demonize people. But then we read this philosopher who gave an account of evil people that convinced me. And so it might even include cases of people who are irredeemable because they insist on harming others despite
I'll find that
opportunities.
episode and link it in the chat.
Yeah. And anyways, but yeah, maybe we can pivot here. Because as I mentioned at the beginning, I wanted to ask you maybe a meta question about scholarship and identity, because you said you're an independent scholar, and one of the areas in philosophy that I work on has to do with sort of the politics of knowledge, the politics of higher education, departmentalization, the balkanization of the discipline, sort of thinking about the sociology of knowledge production. And as an independent scholar, I just want to get your thoughts on where we are now, especially in a world of Substack, of social media, in terms of knowledge production, especially knowledge production that happens sort of with 1 foot or 2 feet out of academia or like institutions of higher learning. It's a very broad question, but yeah, how have you experienced this identity of independent scholar?
Well, I'd love to hear your guys' experience, because you are, you've embedded within institutions, but are still doing all of this. You have this really big podcast and you're doing all of this social media stuff. So you seem to be doing kind of both, which is probably a very wise career move. But I think it's very difficult, because I think the university is in absolute crisis. I think many academics feel like it's not a good job anymore. But then the problem is that there aren't really any good jobs. So is it still a better job than most other jobs? I don't know. Yeah, I think there's a lot around needing to have credibility, needing to have a kind of sign value of being part of an institution. I mean, I've always had an affiliation with a university, and I still do. I'm with Goldsmiths, who are great, by the way.
And what exactly is your affiliation with them now, Laura?
I'm a visiting scholar.
You visit, okay.
Yeah. And I feel I like to have that. So, I like at least the idea of being part of a kind of academic intellectual community. And I must say that the community at Goldsmiths is probably one of the most genuine, authentic communities I know of. And I also think you kind of I feel like you kind of have to have something like that to be taken seriously. And especially certain people, I think it has a lot to do with also with gender and ethnicity and things like that. Like certain people are taken more seriously than others. That other people need more affiliations and more qualifications and blah, blah, blah. And
the number of random white guys who are like, I'm a philosophy expert on the internet. I'm like, who are you?
Exactly. But it's tricky. And I think, probably the sort of smartest thing to do is to do what you guys are doing, which is both. If you have the capacity to do that and you're able to do that, that's probably the wisest move.
Yeah.
What do you guys think?
Yeah, thanks for sharing that perspective. And I think the what really stands out to me and what you just said is like, if you're able to do both. And I think I've been on two very different sides of that. Before I just got tenure at Pomona this year, and thank you. That means I was tenure track for 6 years before that. But prior to that, I had visiting positions for 4 years. And at the time, what I really wanted to do was public facing philosophy. But I had to spend so much time writing job applications that I didn't have a lot of time for it. And also because I was on a series of 1-year visiting contracts, I didn't know what my future was going to be. And so how can I set myself up for a future, whether that's like academic publishing or non-academic public facing work or something entirely different, when I don't know like whether an institution is going to be giving me healthcare in a year. And so I think that was like a really tough position to be in, because it was hard both to do academic and non-academic work. And then now, when kind of the second I got my tenure track job, David and I started Overthink. And it was finally like, oh, wow, I actually have the bandwidth to do this. And so I think now I've found over the years, especially as Overthink has gotten more successful, it has become very difficult to sort of like essentially do two jobs at once. But initially, it was really the freedom that having a secure job gave me that enabled me to envision this future for myself. And so I think like when I hear that question of if you're able to do it, the way I experience that now is how can I find time to do effectively two jobs at once? But that's like a much more luxurious problem to have than what I had a few years ago, which was how can I find time to do this when I'm like just trying to make ends meet? And also beyond the time question, how do I carve out a space for myself? Because as you mentioned, so much prestige is associated with being affiliated with the university. And like it really, the difference between me getting the tenure track job at a fancy college that I have now and not and being, unaffiliated with the university was a matter of luck, not because I wasn't deserving of the job that I have, but because so many other people were deserving that I have too and got edged out. And so, we have seen David and I have so many brilliant people that we went to grad school with who have been of the university. And like that, the increasing adjunctification here is just such a major element of the crisis. David, do you want to add anything? Or yeah, Laura, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask David.
No, I mean, I think you're right that there have been changes in the economic structuring of universities. People now talk about the neoliberal university as a place that prioritizes profit, that prioritizes efficiency, and that it has largely abandoned its mission of, educating students and giving them a humanistic worldview. And I think that's why so many people who have been edged out of academia, even though obviously many of them have hard feelings about that because it wasn't a voluntary departure, ultimately can find other things to do in many cases. And also why so many of us who were lucky enough to get a position also fantasize about leaving, because there is a pretty rampant sort of mental health crisis among academics.
And David, can I say
burnout and dissatisfaction?
Yeah. And David, I don't know how much you want to like say about your specific position, but something you and I have talked a lot about is that even though we're both tenured professors, the working conditions of our jobs are super different. Like I'm at a private liberal arts college where I have very small teaching load and a pretty like robust, we have like a massive endowment. And your situation at a Cal State is really different.
Yeah, I'm at a state university. So it also is a difference. It makes a difference where you are. There are very different kinds of institutions. And so, yeah, I mean, on an average semester, I teach more classes than Ellie. My class sizes are roughly twice the size of hers. We were just informed by administration that they are arbitrarily changing our contract so that we have to teach more, even though contractually, we have a certain number. And so they're just sort of violating that.
Are you unionized?
We are unionized, and despite the pretty strong union, they're just saying your contract was not really a contract. It was just sort of like a little perk that you got for a little bit, and so they're calling it a perk. And so, anyways, the crisis is pretty significant, and obviously, it's affecting not only the faculty and the students, but it's also affecting the knowledge production, right? Like who gets to speak, who wants to speak, what gets said. And so that's what interests me, how all of this ultimately has ramifications in terms of the ideas that end up circulating in different disciplines. Hence my interest in getting your thoughts about, being in this category that has its own kind of name recognition. People know what an independent scholar is, but it also is a category that gets problematized by these issues of credibility and affiliation and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if I could write like this book, Capitalism versus Love. Like, I don't know if that's a project that I could have done like within the confines of a discipline or an institution. Maybe. I think you have to be very good at like navigating that world and sort of it's kind of like playing a game, I think, to be able to do what you really want to do and think in the way that you want to think and practice in the way you want to practice. If you don't mind asking, I was wondering if does having a big social media following help you in your career? Like, does it help you get jobs? Like, does it help you with your whatever publication
Yes.
things you have to do?
Do I have thoughts on that? The short answer is yes, and in very surprising ways. So, we neither David nor I had any social media following or a podcast when we got our tenure track jobs. So it didn't help us, get the jobs that we have. But something that I found really interesting is that although my job is not explicitly tied to the public facing work I do at all. So, for instance, when I went up for tenure, I'm being judged on my academic peer reviewed research, my teaching, and my service to the college and to the community. And technically, the podcasting work that I do is service to the community, but I would have met the service criteria even without it. So effectively, it means nothing for my tenure file. But something I found really surprising is that having a social media following has had indirect impacts. So, for instance, a few years ago, when my article on hermeneutic labor came out, that was shared a lot on Twitter, which I'm fairly certain led to more academic citations, which is something that my job is is part of my assessment. It also led to my research being mentioned in the Washington Post, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, New York Times, places like that. And even though that doesn't directly impact my assessment, then Pomona trustees are hearing about that. And they're like, oh, wow, you have this, fancy philosophy professor. So I think it's those kinds of things, like this feedback loop that I never anticipated.
Yeah, invitations to conferences, a lot of academia
True.
also happens through
Yes.
these kind of like second order friendships,
Yes.
like professional friendships.
David, can I add
not-
one thing super quickly to that?
Mhm.
Just like in our case, I think too, we're in a philosophy department. David and I we specialize in continental European philosophy, which in the US is very marginalized, as opposed to like analytic philosophy. And I think David and I, especially me, who works on like more very traditional continental stuff like post-structuralism and phenomenology, I've gotten way more recognition by analytic philosophers than I previously had. And so like invitations to American Philosophical Association, sort of like the standard analytic conferences, we've found ourselves welcomed into in virtue of having a podcast, like not in virtue of our research. So anyway, David, sorry, I just wanted to like add to that, but back to what you were saying.
Yeah. No, I want to draw attention to the fact that we have about 7 minutes left. And Ellie, I know you had another question.
Yeah. I think I don't think we have 7 minutes left. I think we're meant to wrap up by 10 or so. So we'll have a few.
Like roughly.
We have a few. So I wanted to ask actually kind of in relation to David's last question about the conditions of your work, but also related to, I think, to kind of like circle back to the topic of love and capitalism. You mentioned early on that you have this course, Capitalism versus Love, with the School of Radical Imagination. And I also have been doing Substack courses. I launched my Substack last October with a course on intimate relationships that was funded by a fellowship I got from Notre Dame University that basically allowed me to produce a bunch of high quality videos that I teach as part of a class I teach at Pomona, but then I also offer on Substack. And then launching that and, having the subscription-based model. Oh, bye, David. Okay. He was done. I don't know where he went, but hopefully he'll come back. Anyway, launching that and having the subscription has then enabled me to finance like an additional course that I'm now teaching on Substack and that type of thing. And so I think like that's been super interesting for me because I have always wanted to be able to connect, with a broader audience. And I think there's a major interest among the public for courses that they can access without being enrolled at a university. And so I'm curious if you could just tell us a little bit about like, what is the Capitalism versus Love course? I understand it's entirely asynchronous, right? And so I'm curious, like, how that has been. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but tell me, that was my understanding. And like what it's been like working with the School of Radical Imagination. And then maybe also you want to just share a little bit about the content of the course in case anybody here is interested in taking it.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think you're right that there's a real hunger for that kind of knowledge and like breaking it out of the sort of traditional institutions. So the School of Radical Imagination is new. It's it's in its second semester. So I was part of the inaugural cohort. It was set up, like I said, by this Palestinian scholar and impact coach called Basu Abu Juday. And it's the School of Radical Imagination. So it's all about kind of, how do we open up our imaginations and, use our imaginations for transformation, for collective liberation. So they do lots of, and I think a big part of it is it combines, like personal development stuff with kind of rigorous academic scholarship. So I think that, and they all of the courses are based around a personal project. So people apply what they learn to something, whatever it is they're for themselves, like whatever it is that they're working on, whatever their urgent questions are at the time. So yeah, it's just getting off the ground, so we're kind of, it's one big experiment. So it's really interesting and exciting and hard work. And my course is called Capitalism versus Love, and it's kind of built around, and it's exploring a lot of these questions that we've been talking about. So it's combining a big kind of structural critique of capitalism with exploring all of these kind of pathways of this framework of love as for collective liberation. And it's kind of framed around, anyway, the way I've been teaching it so far, it's framed around different sort of systems of oppression. So it's looking at like class, race, gender, and the gender binary, ableism, and the nuclear family institution of capitalism, and then looking at, well, what do we want instead? How can we use love? How can we develop love in this way? And what we can personally do, how we personally want to be working with these concepts.
Awesome. I just linked the school in the chat, and I'm going to link your course as well as we close. I think it sounds like the school is just doing fantastic things, and taking a scroll through the other courses that are offered sounds super interesting. So, all right, David, do you want to close us out?
Yes. No, well, Laura, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. I know this was, a good conversation that was organic. We didn't send you questions ahead of time, even though we clearly had a lot of questions, because we think the work you're doing is really great and valuable. And so we appreciate you taking the time to chat with us.
Oh, thank you very much. It was lovely to meet you both. It was a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we're super grateful. Look forward to, obviously, you and I have a lot of overlap in our interests. So I look forward to staying in touch, maybe more lives in future. I also want to thank our student assistant, Bayarma Bat-Erdeen, who put this together and was super interested in your work. And was the one who encouraged us to do a live with you. So it's been fantastic. Thank you all so much for joining.